As the shadows of mystery creep in, the unseeing eyes watch and the cameras roll. What unfolds in the grainy footage is inexplicable, unsettling, and leaves behind a sense of disappointment when it fails to offer any answers to the bizarre enigmas. Number 10. Out of all the surveillance videos and CCTV stills connected to missing people, this one is definitely the most haunting. As soon as the woman seen in this footage walks out of frame, she abruptly and mysteriously disappears, never to be seen again. The camera captured the very last known movements of this missing person. In the evening of the 9th of June 2023, Autumn Shagan left her family home in Barrie, Ontario. No one knew it at the time, but that would be the last time they saw or heard from this 27-year-old. The next day, on the 10th of June, between 10 a.m. and noon, Autumn was last seen on this very security camera in Ann Street near Sunningdale Park. Walking in front of her was a male friend with whom she was going to the Barrie waterfront to watch an air show with. Both were carrying skis. It was sunny that day, and hopes of having a good, peaceful day were high. But as soon as Autumn walked out of frame, those intentions would dissipate. As they walked, the unnamed man turned, with the idea that he would see his friend trailing behind him, but instead she was gone. A sense of unease ran over him. Something was most certainly wrong. She was there 1 minute and simply gone the next. He heard no cry for help, not a single sound. His friend had just vanished into thin air, leaving many questions that would go unanswered for years to come. The camera captured nothing out of the ordinary either. No vehicle came driving past, and no other person stepped into frame. Whatever happened to her was almost otherworldly. When Lily, Autumn's sister, tried to text her, asking her to answer the phone, her texts wouldn't go through. It was soon discovered that the woman had enigmatically disappeared, and 2 days later she was reported missing. The family immediately suspected the man, whom Autumn had allegedly met just 2 weeks prior. Police, though, interviewed him several times, finding nothing out of the ordinary. He's since remained in close contact with the family, hoping to help where he could. An investigation into this bizarre event revealed that before she disappeared, Autumn had been on the phone with an unknown person, whom she spoke with for an hour. The family believes that whoever that person was, they may have some knowledge as to what happened that fateful day, but this caller remains unidentified. After investigating her digital footprint further, they found her phone was shut off the day she vanished, right after messaging her sister just 3 minutes earlier. It just didn't make any sense. As the police, investigators, family, and friends scrambled for information, the weeks were drawing on. Those weeks turned into months, and before they knew it, they were met with a grim milestone. On the 10th of June this year, they were commemorating the 2-year anniversary of Autumn's disappearance, whose case remains unsolved despite the tireless efforts. Number 9. Tiwa Matui, originally from Zimbabwe, headed to Swansea, Wales in the UK for a new start to life. In 2019, he had just finished his studies in IT, while also looking into a career in rapping. He was still living in the student accommodation in February of that year, eager to start his life. The 21-year-old's ambitions, though, would be abruptly cut short when, on the 7th of February, he vanished into oblivion. At 8:30 p.m. the evening prior, Tiwa opted for a night out with his friends. He headed to one of his friends' houses, carrying his laptop with him. His parents said he was happy that day, describing him as being his normal self when he left the home. Later, he would head off to Wind Street to the Fiction nightclub with several friends. They last saw him at the club at 3:45 a.m., the time when he left, and made his way toward McDonald's. According to some sources, it seemed that he connected with other friends at the fast food restaurant around 4:40 that morning, where he was spotted on CCTV cameras, chatting and joking around. 8 minutes later, though, he would leave the restaurant and was seen heading off on his own in a light jog. Tiwa was spotted on surveillance footage again, just a short time later at 5:10 a.m., arriving at his St. David's student accommodation at Castle Gardens. He left just 1 minute later, heading back in the same direction he came from. 20 minutes would go by before he was seen again by CCTV. This time, he was spotted outside of a local supermarket located near Tawe River that flows through the city. The footage seems to show Tiwa weaving around the pillars as he walked through the car park. From there, his movements went undocumented until 7:06, when security cameras captured his arrival at the Swansea Yacht Club. This would be the very last time that Tiwa would be seen, and he vanished shortly after. When the young man failed to show up to greet his sister, who was returning from school, the family reported him missing. The investigation managed to secure these sightings of the missing man, only to meet a dead end. Inquests in the vanishing found that 2.5 hours before his last sighting, Tiwa was no longer active on his phone, possibly indicating that it ran out of battery. What's most perplexing about this case is that after 7:06 that morning, in the bustling streets of Swansea, no one else had any contact with him or saw him at all. He'd simply disappeared, never popping up on any other surveillance camera again. The family believes that someone must have seen something, but is withholding information for an unknown reason. Tiwa's unexpected disappearance was noted to be out of character with all that knew him, suggesting the impossibility of the event being voluntary. 10,000 posters flooded the Swansea streets with hopes that someone might eventually come forward. Years have passed since, and no revelations have been made in the case. Number 8. It was New Year's Eve when two men riding on a bike came across something they least expected. In the woods, just off of Ed Bluestein Boulevard in Texas, was a body belonging to a woman. They managed to get in contact with the police, who quickly identified the Jane Doe as Nicole Diane Coleman. To understand her story, we have to start from the beginning, in March of 1995, when she was born into a family with two sisters, and she had an ordinary upbringing filled with love and fulfillment. She'd grow up to become a loving, humorous, and empathetic young girl who was always kind. She enjoyed going on walks and considered herself to be a spiritual individual, connected to the ocean, trees, and fireflies. From her teen years, though, Nicole would begin to struggle with mental health issues before she eventually was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Luckily, by the time she was 18, she had a grip on her condition and was living her best life. By this time, her parents were divorced, and she was living with her mother in Houston while she attended Houston's Lone Star College with a 4.0 GPA. Through her hardships, Nicole managed to finish her Associate of Arts degree and became hell-bent on being a therapist, hoping to help people with mental health issues. In 2014, after being accepted into the Sam Houston State University, she began looking for her own apartment. While attending university, though, things began to get bad again, and she found herself in a downward spiral. Things would continue to spiral well into 2018, when she finally decided to check herself into the Austin mental health facility, where she would receive treatment. It wouldn't be long before she began to feel better, and by December, she was out of the facility and in a women's group with another 3 patients. At this point, she began trying to figure out if she wanted to move back to Houston or remain in Austin. 2 weeks later, though, she would never get the opportunity to finalize her plans. It was the 28th of December, 2018, when Nicole mysteriously disappeared. She left the home alone to go on a walk, wearing a pink and white sweater and capri jeans. The 23-year-old headed over to the Cool Corner gas station, which she was known to frequent. It suggested that she was still new to the area and didn't know anyone, so she hung out there hoping to make friends. Nicole was seen on the gas station security camera walking through the parking lot at 5:26 that afternoon. She's seen again at 6:07, walking back through the parking lot, and that's the last time anyone would see her alive. She never returned to the group home and stopped responding to text messages. 3 days later, she was found deceased along the cycling route. Her clothing had been bundled up on the sidewalk, and she'd sustained traumatic injuries throughout her body. In the early stages of the investigation, police began to wonder if this homicide was connected to an assault that had happened days earlier. The perpetrator was David Green, but after an extensive investigation, he was found not to be connected to Nicole's homicide. The police and family believe that someone out there knows something and hasn't volunteered any information. Jillian, Nicole's grandmother, enforced this by saying that whoever did this to her granddaughter is dangerous, scary, and will do it again. Number 7. It was the early hours of the evening in February of 2016 when something sinister was lurking in the front yard of an unsuspecting Brisbane resident's home. It happened in Queensland, not once but twice in that same year, at the same place. The woman's house was equipped with surveillance cameras, hoping to dissuade opportunistic robbers from burglarizing her. The presence of cameras, though, wasn't enough to throw this particular individual off. That night, crouching in the shadows cast by a truck was an unknown man, a stalker. He made sure that no one else would see him, ducking behind the standing truck when other vehicles came idling by. His clothing was brightly colored, making him all the more noticeable on camera. He walked softly toward the window, peering in momentarily, before quickly hurrying off into the darkness from which he emerged. Dubbed the Naringa Stalker, the man was left unidentified, and the Queensland police began to appeal for information. Why was he there? What was he looking for? Well, the video was no doubt unsettling for the homeowner, who just wanted answers to these very questions. Unease settled over the neighborhood for a month, until it finally subsided with no new incidents being reported. But then on the 25th of March, in the early evening hours at 7 p.m., the creepy man returned. He was dressed in the same attire, a colored shirt, a baseball hat, shorts, sandals, and sporting a full beard. Again, he emerged from the shadowy depths, stepping softly with intent. He crouched beneath the window, in full view of the camera, glaring through the window without a sound, and without attracting any attention to himself. There he would stay for the next 20 minutes, secretly watching whatever the homeowner was doing. Occasionally, he would crawl back onto the grassy patch before going back to the window, and eventually retreating back into the shadows, displaying mannerisms that many described as golem-like. The woman would go on to review the previous night's footage, only to have that sense of unease wash over her once more. The creeper was back, and stayed longer than he had before. Though he left without incident, the visual itself was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. The Queensland police launched a manhunt after viewing the disturbing footage, hoping to capture this stalker, and they demanded to know what he wanted. They released the footage to the public, thinking that someone might be able to identify him, but no one ever did. Number 6. Simply known as Noven to her friends, Adriana Noven Kaya was born in Indonesia. Not much is known about her history, aside from her aspirations of becoming a fashion designer and opening her very own boutique. Described as a good and kind-spirited student, Noven didn't hesitate to show kindness to anyone. She suffered no issues at school and was academically gifted, leading to her becoming involved in several organizations associated with the school. She was 18 years old in 2019 and would be staying at a boarding house that was conveniently located in close proximity to her school. The quick travel to and from made it easier, safer, or at least it should have. It was the 8th of January, 2019, when Noven began the journey back to the board house from school. She decided to cut through a school alleyway, a convenient shortcut that she likely often used. A staircase descended into the shadowy alley, and upon walking down, Noven was met with a stranger coming from the opposite direction. As they walked past one another, the man revealed a dagger. Without warning, he launched himself at Noven, striking her repeatedly before running back up the stairs, disappearing for good. The young woman collapsed and wouldn't be discovered until moments later when a rice seller walked by the alleyway and saw that it was red-stained. The police arrived, followed by the ambulance, which tried all they could to reanimate the victim, but it was no use. Noven was gone. The dagger was allegedly still left in the victim's chest, 22 centimeters deep. Investigators couldn't secure a usable fingerprint from the blade, nor could they find any other evidence at the crime scene. They ended up questioning 38 people who were in the area at the time, and even some of Noven's teachers and classmates, hoping to figure out who may have done this, but they came up empty-handed, leaving them to rely on just one piece of evidence, the CCTV footage that captured the brazen assailant lingering in the alley. The camera was placed so conveniently that it covered the whole area, allowing police to get a clear view of the perpetrator. It was an open and shut case, except it wasn't. Even though they had footage of the assassin, they couldn't figure out who he was. Even after releasing the stills from the footage to the public, the assailant was never identified. Hoping to narrow down the search for this mysterious man, police attempted to establish a motive. Initially, they thought it might be a robbery, but none of Noven's items were missing. So they turned to possible enemies that the kind-hearted young woman may have had. Not long before her demise, Noven had broken up with her boyfriend from Bandung. An airtight alibi, though, removed him from the list of suspects. Another 4 individuals were looked into based solely on their appearance, which was said to resemble the slayer, but they too were all ruled out. The most sinister piece of information would then be discovered. According to family members, a chain message had been circulating among Noven's friend group, claiming that there was going to be another homicide soon. The message didn't say who the victim was going to be, when it was going to happen, or where. Despite investigators looking into this threat, authorities couldn't track down where it came from or who was behind it, leaving the disturbing mystery frustratingly unsolved. Number 5. Alan Wood was rather popular and very much liked for his laid-back nature and kind heart. He was a hard worker, according to family, and enjoyed the simple pleasures that life had to offer. As far as friends and family were concerned, he had no enemies, which is why it came as such a shock when he was found deceased in his home in 2009. In the rural town of Lound, in the county of Lincolnshire, UK, consisting of nothing more than a church, some mills, and 18th century houses, something brutal and unusual unfolded. In the early morning of the 24th of October 2009, a Saturday, one of Alan's friends and a fellow coworker arrived at his home for a visit. But when the friend arrived, they were left with a feeling of unease upon discovering that the front and back doors were left completely ajar. Calling out for Alan yielded no response. Apprehension set in, and the friend eventually decided to call the landlord. He arrived at the property, and the two investigated the bungalow further. They weren't sure what they'd be walking into, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would find. As they drifted through the house, which had no signs of ransacking or even forced entry, they would stumble across a brutal scene. Alan was bound with sellotape, with clear indications he'd been tortured before meeting his untimely demise. The nature of this crime seemed personal, with seemingly no items missing. But who could have done this? Alan was a friendly resident in a friendly town with no known enemies. The landlord and the friend were left incredibly disturbed and made contact with the police. They arrived at what they would go on to name the most horrific crime scene ever witnessed in the history of their police department. Soon, an investigation into this brutal attack was launched, as detectives tried to piece together the last known movements of the well-liked man. By using surveillance footage, they established that Alan was last seen on the 21st of October on Wednesday. He was spotted shopping in the Morrison's supermarket that afternoon. He was later confirmed to have visited a local bar called the Willoughby Arms. He shared a drink with the staff, chatted a bit, got into conflicts, and left at 6:30 p.m. That would be the last time anyone would see Alan alive. But this wasn't the only CCTV evidence available in the case. After realizing that Alan's bank cards had actually been stolen, police determined that someone had used them in Bourne and in Stamford, specifically at ATM cash points. After trawling through thousands of hours worth of CCTV, a grainy image of the assailant emerged. The shadowy figure stood near the ATM, standing 5'11" inches tall. He wore a smart casual outfit and distinct stripy scarf. He walked with an unusual limp that experts suggest was due to one leg being longer than the other. Forensics also suggested he may have injured his head during the assault. The suspect also seemed to have a strong local knowledge, given his efforts to conceal his identity and being aware of where the cameras were located. The CCTV footage wasn't the only evidence, though. Forensics found a footprint, size 8, made by a Converse Mark LE red shoe, as well as fragments of a bus ticket from the Bourne transport company called Delane. It had been stuck to the sellotape that bound Alan's hands. A full DNA profile had been found too, belonging to someone who wasn't the victim. But to date, no matches to this DNA have been found, even though it was searched across 47 different databases. Number 4. For Barbara Flechman, 2007 was not a time for celebration, for more reasons than one. That year, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and just 1 week away from having surgery for the first time. That November, hoping to uplift his mother's spirits, Kyle decided to treat her to a comedy show that was taking place at the local arena in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Dane Cook was putting on a show. On the 8th of November, Barbara, Kyle, his sister Noelle, and his best friend Dan headed to the comedy show. The laughs and giggles continued until 10 p.m. that evening, which sent Barbara and her daughter heading home. Kyle's evening, though, wasn't over just yet. He and Dan decided to head off to meet some friends and grab a few drinks before they went home. It was cold that evening when Barbara thanked her son for the wonderful evening and climbed into the warmth of her car. Kyle called out to his mother, saying he'd see her the next day, but little did anyone know that day would be their last goodbye. The 24-year-old turned to follow Dan to the Buckhead Saloon in uptown Charlotte, a bar that was often very crowded. The evening would go on to unfold like this. Kyle spent his time jumping between his friends and chatting with the girl he had just met. At around 12:30 a.m., Dan closed his bar tab and left. Kyle opted to remain behind, saying he'd get a cab. Most of the group had also gone home around this time, leaving the young man to his own devices. Between 1 a.m. and 2:15, he could be seen chatting with the young woman at the bar, an exchange that was captured on the security camera. During that time, an alleged verbal altercation would break out between the woman's partner and a friend group, though it isn't confirmed if Kyle was involved. After 2:15 a.m., the woman left, and not long after, the man places a call to his sister. The attempt went unanswered. At 2:19 that morning, surveillance cameras captured Kyle's departure from the bar, leaving his jacket and bank card behind. He chatted with some people outside, including a woman he'd been dancing and chatting with earlier. Following the brief exchange, he was captured on CCTV again, walking on North College Street. According to a Fuel Pizza employee, Kyle arrived at the restaurant sometime between 2:22 and 2:45, ordering 2 slices of pizza and asking to use the restroom. But this alleged sighting couldn't be confirmed due to an inaccurate description of what he was wearing. Around the same time, Kyle's phone placed a call to a business he'd been at earlier that evening, supposedly the bar, but it went unanswered. It was then determined that right after that, the device placed a call to its own voicemail, and then attempted to get through to his father 3 times, each of which went unanswered too. At 3 a.m., he tried to contact Noelle again, and 28 minutes later, he tried Dan. Kyle tried his roommate Bruce next, but none of them picked up. At 4 that morning, the device was turned off, and Kyle Flechman subsequently disappeared. By mid-morning of the 8th of November, concern among friends and family began to mount. They repeatedly tried to call the missing man, but it went straight to voicemail every time. Kyle's car was still at Dan's house. The roommates hadn't spoken to him, and no one had seen him since. Panicked, Barbara contacted the police, and a search was subsequently launched, but because the missing person was an adult, very little attention was paid to it. A private detective was hired, and a Facebook page was established, but neither of these efforts would ever figure out what happened to Kyle. Number 3. Dani Escobar, the adoptive daughter of Mario and Dolores Escobar, was studying law in 2022 at Nuevo León in Mexico. She had high hopes for her future, only for them to abruptly be snuffed out come April of that year. On the 8th of April, Dani headed to a party with 2 friends. The venue was the Quinta Diamante estate in General Escobedo. The evening started off like any other, but as it drew on, something began to change in the 18-year-old. She began to display uncharacteristic, erratic behavior that led her to become involved in an altercation and even lock herself in the men's bathroom. Due to this bizarre behavior, Dani would be kicked out of the venue. Her friends called a man named Juan David Cuellar, a taxi driver, asking if he could come and pick up their friend. Cuellar arrived at the place, but Dani refused to get in the car or go home. They waited a few minutes for her to calm down, and eventually she did, even asking if she could charge her phone in the car. After that, she agreed to leave and sat in the back of the vehicle. The driver drove off, and soon the erratic behavior returned. Dani climbed into the front seat and was not in control of herself, according to Cuellar. When he asked for her address, she refused to give it to him, so they continued to drive. Eventually, they came to the city limits, at which point she began muttering something about the truth. The driver recorded the conversation on his phone. After several minutes, Dani asked to get out of the car, and Cuellar pulled over. She got out of the vehicle, but the driver refused to leave, believing that the area was dangerous. After desperately trying to convince her to get back in the car, recording the entire ordeal, he left. He sent the recording to Dani's friends, saying that she wouldn't get back in the car, so he had to leave to attend to his other clients. Surveillance footage would then capture the young woman running along the highway before entering the grounds of the nearby Nueva Castilla motel. This would be the very last time that she was seen alive. When his daughter failed to return home, Mario reported her missing to the Nuevo León State Attorney General's office. The case was shared across social media sites, hoping that someone would come through with information. The Nueva Castilla motel would become the focus of investigations and searches, but for a harrowing 13 days, they found nothing. It wasn't until the 22nd of April that a break in the case would finally come, drawing similarities to the Eliza Lam case. Dani's body was discovered in the water of the motel's cistern. She'd been deceased for some time. The police tried to convince Mario and the public that it was a fatal accident, stating she'd knocked her head and fallen in, but the family refused to believe this. A second autopsy was subsequently carried out, ultimately revealing something far more brutal. Dani showed signs of physical abuse, which occurred prior to her demise. Her COD was listed as a deep cranial contusion. Many aspects of her case remain unexplained, from her erratic behavior to her brutal fate. Number 2. Megan Waterman came into this chaotic world in 1988. Her home was in Westbrook, Maine, at a Days Inn, where she would spend her childhood. Allegations of child neglect and recklessness dominated most of her upbringing too. The social workers were often given the slip when home visits were due to take place. Megan also ended up in the hospital for respiratory distress, which ultimately led to her being removed from her parents' custody. From then on, she would grow up with her grandmother, Muriel, who was the primary mother figure, and her husband, Doug, the father figure. Megan grew up to become independent, fearless, and rebellious. After school, she moved out of Doug and Muriel's home and began a life of her own with children and a man named Akeem Cruz, who swept her off her feet, though he wasn't the father of Megan's daughter. Unfortunately, at some point, the rose-colored glasses fell off, and Megan saw the dangerous nature of the world she'd become ingrained in. Akeem had roped her into a money-making scheme that involved working on the streets and narcotics. Still hopeful for a vision of the future they shared, she agreed to these business exchanges. In 2010, Akeem and 3 other men were arrested for aggravated narcotics trafficking, but just days later, he was out on bail. In the early summer of that year, Megan and Akeem would head for a trip to Long Island, where the nefarious activities would continue. It would be from this very disguised vacation that she would never return. On the 1st of June, Megan took a bus from Portland to New York and checked into a hotel. The hotel would be the meetup place for clients after she posted ads on Craigslist advertising an escort business. A few days later, Megan called her friend Nikki, sharing some exciting news. She claimed that Akeem wanted to have children with her, and it was viewed as an increased commitment to the shared vision of their lives. The day after that, Megan spoke with her biological mother, with whom she was still in contact. The conversation appeared normal, with nothing out of the ordinary. But this, though, would be the last time Lorraine or anyone would hear from the 22-year-old. On the 5th of June, at 8 p.m., the hotel's security camera captured the pair leaving the hotel together. 5 minutes later, Megan returns alone. She chatted on the phone with Muriel around this time and phoned her again at midnight. Just over an hour later, Megan and Akeem spoke on the phone, and again minutes later. During this conversation, the young woman said she was going out for a while and hung up. Megan grabbed her phone and left on foot, with security cameras capturing her departure at 1:30 that morning. The last sighting of her would come just moments later when a witness spotted her heading towards a nearby convenience store. By 11 a.m. that day, Akeem began to grow concerned, having not heard from his partner for hours. Eventually, he reported her missing, and Megan's name dominated headlines for the next 11 days. Each article spelled out the suspicious circumstances of her disappearance. Search efforts were arranged, and flyers littered the streets, but to no avail. Months would go by, during which Akeem would be arrested for narcotics offenses several times, in hopes of ever finding Megan alive were beginning to dwindle. In December of that year, 4 bodies were discovered in Long Island, with the possibility that Megan was among them. As identifications were underway for these victims of a brutal mass slaying, a sinister narrative began to unfold. Since 1993, a series of slayings had swept across the area, believed to be the work of a lone slayer. Police were able to connect several unsolved homicides to the mysterious entity. In 2011, one of the bodies was confirmed to be that of 22-year-old Megan Waterman, who was named another victim of the Long Island slayer. In 2024, one suspect was named, with police believing that the 59-year-old Rex Howerman may be behind the brutal attacks. Number 1. What happened to Paul Kochu? This is the question that his family would still like the answer to more than 10 years after his disappearance and demise. It was the early days of December 2014 when the young man headed to Bucktown, Chester County for a pre-holiday visit with his family. He planned to stay for a while, but when warnings of a snowstorm came in, he decided to return home earlier since he just started his new job as an ICU nurse in Pittsburgh. Ellen, his mother, shoved him out the door that day, telling him that he would get stuck in the snow if he didn't hurry. Paul returned home without issue that day, and when night fell, he and his friends decided to head off to a bar to watch Monday Night Football. During the evening, the 22-year-old was drinking and eventually found that he'd consumed way too much and opted to head home. At some point that evening, Paul sliced his hand, supposedly on a broken bottle, and was accompanied back home by his roommate, Ben Monito. The friends congregated at the residence and decided to leave around 1:30 in the morning on the 16th of December to get some food. They left the injured and intoxicated Paul at the apartment and left. This would be the last time that anyone would see him alive. When they arrived back, he was gone, along with his keys, wallet, and cell phone. The next day, he was reported missing to the police, and an investigation was soon underway. After sifting through several hours worth of surveillance footage, they managed to spot Paul. He was headed in the direction of the 10th Street Bridge around 2:45 that morning. The footage shows his erratic walk, weaving from one side of the pavement to the other, occasionally holding his hand that was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. What happened after he stepped out of the camera frame remains unknown. Several posters, search efforts, and appeals for information yielded no results. It was a strange mystery, with many wondering how someone could just vanish. Just as hopes of finding him were dwindling, 3 months later, Paul's body was discovered. It had been floating in the Ohio River near West Virginia. The body had no clothes on, 3 broken ribs, and a 1-inch wound to the scalp. Though the COD was listed as undetermined, family and friends voiced their concerns and suspicions that foul play was involved. Despite hiring a forensic pathologist, no new information surfaced, leaving Paul's demise unsolved. The case is often mentioned in tandem with the disappearance and demise of 23-year-old Dakota James, who met an eerily similar end in 2017. Over the years, theories about these 2 mysterious passings have circulated, including that of the smiley face homicides narrative that adds gang violence into the mix. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.